So it's been a very busy news day. And of course, the weather system looming over everybody's environment right now is these reports from multiple news agencies that the Mueller investigation may soon be producing its report. Now, as always, the most important thing there is that nobody really knows other than Mueller and his team. And they don't leak and they don't make public comments, so nobody really knows. But the expectation that Robert Mueller is about to produce his final report, those expectations are more heightened now than they have ever been. And it is in that context tonight that we are bringing you this Rachel Maddow Show special report. This is something that we have been working on for a while now, and it's based on documents we have obtained, most of which have previously never been seen by the public. So let me just give you a little table of contents in terms of how this is going to go tonight. First of all, there's a couple of sets of documents I'm going to show you that are things that have just never before seen the light of day, or certainly never widely seen the light of day. One of them adds a previously unknown element to our understanding of a recent president. Another set of these documents adds a fairly explosive new set of facts to what we know about an important White House scandal. So a couple of sets of documents, one about a recent president, one about a relatively recent White House scandal. But where we're going to land here is on some documents and some revelations, including one very important interview, which have direct implications for some of the thorniest questions we are facing right now when it comes to this presidency and the potential resolution of the existential scandal that has surrounded the Trump presidency and the Trump election from the very, very beginning. So that's your table of contents. Basically, get comfortable, deep breath. Here comes some stuff we have really never heard about before. All right, where we are going to start tonight is October 1988. Just a few weeks before the 1988 presidential election. The 1988 presidential election, of course, was between Democratic nominee Michael Dukakis, who was the sitting governor of Massachusetts, and the Republican nominee, who was the sitting vice president of the United States, George Herbert Walker Bush. So it was just a few weeks before that election, that October, when those two nominees squared off in a presidential debate, a debate that would become the stuff of political legend. It was the final debate that year. It was held in Los Angeles on the campus of UCLA. And the big moment that everybody still remembers from that debate all these years later is actually a moment that came right out of the gate, came right at the top of the debate. The Democratic nominee, Michael Dukakis, was asked right at the start of the debate what he would do if his wife, Kitty, were raped and murdered. Sure, Michael Dukakis had long been opposed to the death penalty, but what if his wife, Kitty, was raped and murdered? Would he still be against the death penalty then? Michael Dukakis got that question. It was the first question of the whole debate. And I don't know exactly how you would give a right answer to that question, but this, at the time, was seen as not the right answer.
Governor, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life. I don't see any evidence that it's a deterrent, and I think there are better and more effective ways to deal with violent crime.
Again, hard to know what the right way is to answer that particular question. But that dispassionate, calm answer from Governor Dukakis, that was seen at the time as sort of a political disaster. That was seen as the, oh my God, he just blew the whole election kind of moment. And in fact, the Dukakis campaign did not come back after that last debate. Dukakis had had a huge lead over George H.W. Bush that summer of 1988. I mean, Vice President Bush was vice president, but he was essentially trying to run for a third term of the Ronald Reagan presidency. And it's always hard to ask voters to give the same party 3 presidential terms in a row. Poppy Bush was also a little hamstrung by his choice of a running mate. He had picked a man named Dan Quayle, who was a fairly well-respected, handsome young Republican senator, to be his vice presidential running mate. But even though Dan Quayle was liked well enough as a senator, as a potential vice president, he was widely seen as not ready for prime time, seen as not up to the task of being a heartbeat away from the presidency. And in the summer of 1988, when George H.W. Bush was really on the ropes, when it looked like he was not going to win, it was way down in the polls, definitely looked like Dukakis was going to beat him. Summer of '88, he secretly reached out to an old friend, for help in trying to figure out how to come back and win that election. That debate in Los Angeles was held on October 13th, 1988. 2 days before the debate, on October 11th, Vice President George H.W. Bush wrote this note. Check it out. Ted, as I head for the coast, I want you to know I got your last 2 letters. I think the quail attacks have not hurt long run. Now off to the last debate. Best wishes, G. Now, the Ted that Vice President G was writing to there was the Honorable Ted Agnew. Spiro Agnew he was writing to. Spiro Agnew, the disgraced, convicted former Vice President of the United States, who had been absent from public life at that point for 15 years, since Agnew had to plead to tax evasion charges and resign the vice presidency in 1973 in a way that only quite narrowly avoided him going to prison. I mean, 2 days before that key last presidential debate in Los Angeles in 1988, maybe the most important moment of George Bush's political life up until that point. And Bush was secretly consulting a convicted felon for political advice? Since we released our little podcast series, Bagman, about the amazing and mostly forgotten scandal that led to the removal of Vice President Spiro Agnew from office, one of the things that's happened since we launched that podcast series, and we got such a great response to it, is that we have been able to get a hold of some new documents related to Spiro Agnew, documents that we didn't have before and that haven't been publicly seen before. And they turn out to be documents that shed some light on details of modern American history that really haven't been known before. Documents like these previously unknown personal correspondences between George H.W. Bush and Spiro Agnew during the summer and fall of the 1988 presidential campaign. Agnew was meeting with at least one advisor to then Vice President Bush. Agnew was offering hints on handling the Dan Quayle attacks. I mean, again, Spiro Agnew at this point was a convicted felon. He was the first vice president to resign his office in disgrace. Everybody else in public life would run a mile to keep their distance from Spiro Agnew. But look, I mean, look at this one. Here was George H.W. Bush, sitting vice president and presidential candidate during that presidential campaign, writing to convicted felon Spiro Agnew, quote, "I'd love to have a paper from you with any suggestions you'd care to make. I'd welcome such a paper. I really would." This was him asking for written advice from Agnew on how Bush could best plan his campaign to beat Dukakis. And it's not like George Bush was naive or ignorant about Spiro Agnew's past. As we found in Bagman, Poppy Bush, who was the Republican Party chairman at the time of the Agnew scandal, he was brought into what looks very much like a criminal obstruction of justice scheme orchestrated by the Nixon White House to try to pressure the federal prosecutors who were working on the Agnew case that they should drop the case. I mean, George H.W. Bush was personally in on that. He was part of that scheme. He knew exactly what had gone down with Agnew. But thanks to these documents that we have now obtained, we can now see that Bush kept up this effusive, secret back-channel communication with Agnew for years after that, including right through his own 1988 presidential campaign. So that Bush-Agnew correspondence, I think, is basically a new piece of presidential and presidential campaign history, which is worth knowing about Poppy Bush and the 1988 campaign, worth knowing about Agnew, especially in light of Agnew's disgrace and the way he was removed from office. But I tell you that in part to lay the groundwork for some of the other stuff that we have obtained. In the course of the Bagman research and thereafter, we have also obtained some other materials that don't just give us an interesting new footnote in presidential history. These are materials that I think are just simply pretty explosive. So let me just show you what we got. What you are looking at here is a telegram, a telex, that was sent in 1980. And as you can see at the bottom of the telex, it's a telegram that was sent by Spiro T. Agnew, former Vice President of the United States. And in terms of the timeline here, you'll recall Agnew resigned the vice presidency in 1973. So this is a telegram he was sending 7 years later in 1980 when he was a private citizen. And he sent this message to, as you can see, His Excellency, Ahmad Abdul Wahab, Chief of Royal Protocol, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. What Spiro Agnew was asking for in this telegram he wrote to the Saudi kingdom was something very specific. He wanted an audience with the Saudi crown prince at the time. Agnew wrote, quote, "It would be deeply appreciated if Your Excellency could arrange for me to have an audience with His Royal Highness Prince Fahd as soon as possible. The matter to be discussed involves a personal emergency that is of critical importance to me." So this is former Vice President Spiro Agnew writing to the chief of protocol of the Saudi royal family in 1980, saying, I need to meet with the crown prince on something that is of critical importance, a personal emergency. Agnew says in this telex, quote, "In the past, His Royal Highness has assured me that he would be available should I need to see him." So this is a former vice president basically calling in a chit of some kind. He once told me I could call on him if I ever needed help. Well, now I need help. What Agnew gets back in response to this telegram is this. To His Excellency Spiro Agnew, read your telex in which you have expressed your wish to have an audience with His Royal Highness Prince Fahd. Stop. We can arrange for you to have an audience with His Royal Highness on August 15th. Regards. So then we get Agnew's response back to that. Telex back to the Saudi protocol chief, quote, "I am very pleased to accept your kind offer to arrange an audience with His Royal Highness Prince Fahd on August 15th. So this is Agnew saying, okay, I'll be there. Quote, "Please advise time and location when available." So America's relationship with Saudi Arabia is complicated even in the best of times, right? I mean, think about what we're in right now. I mean, as we speak, the U.S.-Saudi relationship right now revolves around, among other things, a suspected illicit relationship between the Saudi royal family and the National Enquirer, which is headed up by the president's longtime friend, David Pecker. Questions about whether the National Enquirer might have been acting as an agent of the Saudi government when that publication went on the warpath against Amazon CEO and Washington Post owner Jeff Bezos recently. The Post has been critical of the Saudi government recently over the murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi inside a Saudi consulate. Jeff Bezos has suggested that the Saudis may have retaliated against him for that coverage with an extortion and blackmail effort run out of the National Enquirer. All this happening while the Trump administration continues to resist blaming the Saudi government for the murder at all. Just this week, it was announced that the Trump administration is also now being investigated by the Oversight Committee in Congress over a secret plan to transfer highly sensitive nuclear technology to Saudi Arabia, against the warnings of top national security officials and potentially against the law. This nuclear thing was a plan that several people associated with the president appear to have had a significant personal financial stake in. So the relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia has been complicated for a long time. It is still messy as all get out right now. But what we now know from these documents we've obtained is that the modern history of Saudi Arabia and presidencies in trouble might be even more complicated than we previously understood, because what disgraced Vice President Spiro Agnew wanted from that desperate plea he was making to meet with the Saudi crown prince that summer of 1980, what this disgraced former U.S. Vice President was approaching Saudi Arabia about and asking for, it's sort of breathtaking, but we're going to show you. Spiro Agnew was writing to the Saudi royal family to solicit their help, their financial support, for him to lead a scorched earth propaganda campaign in the United States to expose the Jews, to wage a political war on Jews in America. No, really. The reason that Spiro Agnew sent that telegram asking for a meeting with the Saudi crown prince is made clear in this draft of a letter that Agnew wrote to the crown prince just a few weeks later. It's dated August 25th, 1980. Your Highness, at the request of Sheikh Ahmed, the protocol chief, I am writing this letter to explain the principal reasons for my urgent request to see you. Your Highness is already familiar with the unremitting Zionist efforts to destroy me. During the time I was under attack from former Attorney General Elliot Richardson in 1973, the reason for their need to drive me out was stated by Richardson several times. He said that I could not be trusted to act properly in the Middle East. Therefore, I was framed and driven from office. The reason was that the Zionists in the United States knew that I would never agree to the continuance of the unfair and disastrous favoring of Israel, and they had to get me out of there so I would not succeed Nixon. Since 1974, the Zionists have orchestrated a well-organized attack on me, the idea being to use lawsuits to bleed me of my resources, to continue my effort to inform the American people of their control of the media and other influential sectors of American society. I'm sure that one of the lawsuits Agnew was then dealing with was encouraged by the B'nai B'rith. In conjunction with the publication of my book, I've taken every opportunity to speak out against the catastrophic U.S. policies regarding Israel. This has spurred my Zionist enemies on to greater efforts. I need desperately your financial support so that I can continue to fight. Former Vice President then asks the Saudi Crown Prince to put $2 million in a secret Swiss bank account for him, from which Agnew would live off the interest, and it would all be untraceable to Saudi Arabia. Quote, if Your Highness is willing to help me, but this method is not suitable, I would be grateful for any other idea that would give me about $200,000 a year for the next 3 years. I do so want to continue my fight against the Zionist enemies who are destroying my once great nation. And here's my favorite part. This is the way that Agnew signs off this letter to the Saudi Crown Prince. He says, quote, my congratulations to Your Highness on the clear and courageous call to jihad. The Zionists have me in a most difficult position, and I need help urgently without delay. With great respect and warm personal regards, I am respectfully Spiro T. Agnew. The jihad congratulations reference there appears to be a reference to the fact that the Saudi Crown Prince just days earlier had publicly called for a holy war against Israel. So congratulations on that from the American Vice President. I mean, just to be clear, this is a former American vice president writing to a foreign government asking for their help in fighting Jews in America. Because the Jews framed him, and it's the Jews who are destroying America, and he'll lead the fight against the Jews for the low, low price of $200,000 a year in secret funding from the Saudi royal family. And on the one hand, okay, this is what became of old Spiro Agnew after he was forced out of office. He became mired in legal battles and lawsuits, and he was constantly looking to drum up money and support in all kinds of ways, including this. On the other hand, this is the former American vice president approaching the Saudi government behind the scenes and saying, help me wage war on the Jews in America, which is exactly as nuts as it sounds. But it gets worse. Because you should also know that the correspondence that we have obtained here suggests that the Saudi government appears to have done it. Again, Spiro Agnew was asking for a $2 million loan to be parked in a bank somewhere, and then he was going to live off the interest. Or maybe there was some other way he could take in about $200,000 a year. Well, about a month after he sent that urgent request for financial support to the Saudi Crown Prince, give me money to fight the Jews. Look, about a month later, look at this. Agnew drafted another letter thanking the Saudi Crown Prince for apparently coming through for him with the funds. Quote, it is difficult for me to find the right words to adequately express my gratitude for the prompt response from Your Highness to my urgent communication. I am now in a position to meet my obligations for about 6 months under the framework set forth in my letter to you. And to make clear that what he's talking about there is money, Agnew says he's also going to try to drum up some additional business in Saudi Arabia, which will, quote, give me the resources to continue the battle against the Zionist community here in the United States. Agnew then appears to have received a letter back from the Saudi Crown Prince wishing him great success in his efforts. So, okay. Less than 10 years out of office, a former American vice president orchestrated a secret financial deal with Saudi Arabia to fight Jews in this country. That seems like something that maybe should matter even today in what's going on between our country and theirs, right? I mean, is it okay that the Saudi royal family and government funded Agnew to do that? Back in the day? I mean, it tells you something about Agnew, but it also tells you something about the royal family as well, which is the same family that's in charge now. We came into possession of these documents after they were uncovered by a historical document collector named Greg Schneider. He then shared them with us. After we obtained the documents from Mr. Schneider and did our own due diligence authenticating them, we then consulted the great Michael Beschloss, NBC's presidential historian, who told us he thinks that these letters, these documents, have never been known about publicly before. So like I said, the reporting we did for Bagman has yielded some unexpected stuff. But as promised, there is something else we turned up in reporting out this story that has quite direct implications for today, maybe even for this week, and specifically for the now quite pressing question of how exactly the investigation into the current president might end, specifically the question of whether the president could be indicted. And that is still ahead. Stay with us.